My name's Emily Loeb, and I'm the Director of Programs and Education at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Luckily, we're in a space that used to be Andrew Mellon's indoor pool, and so it's nice and cool in here as opposed to outside. I know, it's really cool. It's actually, if you turn around, there's a circle that says smile, because if you were doing synchronized swimming, you were supposed to, keep a positive attitude. So the Holocaust Center connects the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with injustices of today. And then through education, we seek to address these injustices and empower individuals to build a more just and humane and civil society. And at the Holocaust Center, we work with schools, teachers, and organizations across the region to support them as they teach about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And we use a whole range of tools to do this, including our own Chutzpah Superheroes of the Holocaust comic book series. And we also organize numerous public programs throughout the year, like the one you're attending this evening. And so tonight's program is part of our Generation Speakers series, which is a program that's generously funded by the Sylvia and Martin Snow Family Fund. And we organize for speakers to share their family stories of surviving the Holocaust to a range of audiences. And this includes everything from middle school students to seniors to government employees. And during this past programming year, we shared our family's stories to over 7,500 people. In fact, tonight, this is our 107th presentation that we've given since July 1st. And it's through these talks that we help students and the general public connect the history of the Holocaust to real people and real families. And so tonight, you're going to get to hear Clare Drobot's family story. And while Clare has presented her presentation in private settings to schools and students and organizations, this is the first time that she's presented it publicly, and we're honored to host her this evening. And so now I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to Clare's colleague, Montez Freeland, who is going to introduce her.
Thank you, Emily. Good evening. I'm Montez Freeland, co-artistic director of City Theater Company, whose mission is to provide an artistic home for the development and production of contemporary plays that engage and challenge a diverse audience. I am here this evening to introduce my colleague with whom I have enjoyed serving the community. Clare and I work together every day, and I can attest to her unwavering passion, dedication, and commitment to civic dramaturgy. Her enthusiasm is truly inspiring. Clare Drobot is a Pittsburgh-based dramaturg, producer, and playwright. She grew up in Northern Virginia, close to her paternal grandparents, Jan and Wanda Drobot. Clare attended Carnegie Mellon University, majoring in creative writing and music composition. She then moved to New York and worked in various capacities in theater before returning to Pittsburgh in 2015 to join the staff at City Theater, where she currently serves as co-artistic director. In addition to her work at City Theater, Clare is on the boards of the National New Play Network and Brewhouse Arts Association, a graduate of Leadership Pittsburgh, and a member of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh's Global Citizens Fellowship Program. It is my pleasure to present to you Miss Clare Drobot.
Thank you, Montez. There's nothing like hearing your bio read out loud to make you nervous. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And I just want to start with a big thank you to Noah, Christina, Emily, and the entire team at the Holocaust Center. The support and the opportunity to speak means a lot. I'm really grateful to be here today sharing my grandparents' story. As Montez mentioned, I am a theater maker. And so I'm very much used to sharing and supporting other people's stories. And it feels, I would say, intimate to be here talking about something so personal today. So to include you all in that intimacy, before I begin, I'd just love to hear from you, to see a show of hands of how many of you have researched your family's histories. Okay, all right, a lot of you. Did you find any surprises there? Okay, all right, a few. I think that's something as I've been involved in this research process that's really resonated. And I think that learning about our family's past is so important because it shapes our present and future. In my case, the story I'm going to share with you, it is one that I didn't know for a long time. I learned some of the details of my grandparents' history around my senior year in high school and have slowly pieced together more of it in the intervening years. I won't share how many intervening years. I'll also share that it's not complete. I make a living telling stories, and I wish I could fill in many of the blanks of what I'm about to share with you. But the truth is, there's much of it I may never know. And that, too, is a part of history, what's lost, what's omitted, and what's forgotten. So here, I'm excited to share the pieces I have of my grandparents' history with you. We're going to start off, as one does, in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., and my grandparents on my father's side lived just a few miles away. I was raised pretty much without religion, which is an important fact that we'll return to later. In fact, both of my grandmothers were deeply disappointed that my parents chose not to have me baptized. But my understanding of our family's religious life was that we were very lapsed Catholics on either side. These are some stellar family photos I have here. So on the left, you will see my dad, my grandmother Wanda, and I posed by a grill, which felt very important. And then moody teenage Clare next to my grandfather Jan. Both Jan and Wanda Drobot, my grandparents, were born in Krakow, Poland, and spent much of the first half of their lives there. My dad was born there as well, too. This is a picture of him. He was born in 1947, and the little boy he's with is his best friend, Mihao. Remember that name for later. Family moved to India when my father was 9, when Jan, my grandfather, was stationed in Delhi on a diplomatic post. India is actually where my father learned English, and from there, eventually, they came to the United States and settled in White Plains, New York. My dad attended Cornell University. It's where he met my mother, and so the story of our family began. My father was raised Catholic. In fact, I actually remember seeing in his boxes of things that he has an award he won for a divinity prize at boarding school, which felt somewhat ironic because by the time I was old enough to discuss religion, I'll say he put his faith in science. He was a physicist, and that seemed to make a great deal of sense. I think I had a fairly typical American childhood and would say in general, our family's relationship to Poland wasn't something I had a lot of access to. We would occasionally eat pierogi and borscht. My grandparents would argue in Polish, which I didn't understand. And my father, by the time I was a child, had also forgotten Polish. It wasn't something they encouraged him to speak. And really, just in general, their life in Poland was something they didn't talk about. They never went back to visit, and it just felt like a very foreign object. And it wasn't until the end of high school when I discovered why my grandparents rarely discussed Poland. My grandmother died my junior year in high school, and not long after she passed, it seemed as though the history I had known about my family began to unspool. I learned that both she and my grandfather had hidden most of their past. They were both Jewish. They had survived World War II in Europe, with Wanda surviving in Poland and Jan in Siberia. And almost all of their relatives, closest friends, family members were murdered in the Holocaust. When I learned that about my grandparents' Jewish identity, it was, I will say at 18, quite frankly, overwhelming. It felt so important, but also it was just something that was incomprehensible. After my grandmother's death, my grandfather continued to respect her wishes. He talked a little bit about his experiences, but just in general, the idea was the past should remain in the past. And so today, I'm going to share what I know of both of their stories, and I'll start with my grandmother. She was born, not Wanda Drobot, but Salomea Wander in Krakow in Poland in 1920. Many of you may know this, but I'm just going to add little bits of historical context throughout. And Krakow is a city that is located in southern Poland. It's one of the oldest cities in Poland and just a cultural center. It's the crown of the Galicia region. And in 1920, to give some of that context, Poland was emerging from the upheaval of World War I. It was a newly independent nation, having been granted sovereignty as part of the peace agreements following the war's end. There was a great deal of national pride and hope, but it was also a very complex time as various political factions vied for control.
and the new nation struggled to rebuild itself from partition and the devastation of war. During this turbulent time, both immediately following the war and then again later in the 1930s as my grandmother was growing up, the Jewish populations of Poland experienced waves of anti-Semitism, ranging from violent attacks to loss of legal protections and quotas capping admission to university programs. Salomea was born into this evolving world, the Jewish daughter of Moses Wander and his wife Rachel, whose maiden name was Connor. Her father, Moses, was a textile merchant, and the family lived in Krakow near the old town, the Stare Miasto, which is a prosperous area, and that's not far. You can kind of see it. It's a market square, not far from Kazimierz, which is the historically Jewish quarter of the city. And I think it's just important context to say that they were located in the city at large. They weren't living in Kazimierz at the time. Records of the Jewish population in Krakow date back as far as the 13th century. And over the intervening years, as the region bounced between Prussia, Austria, Russia, and many other occupying nations, the Jewish population continued to grow and thrive, despite facing numerous pogroms and persecution. By the late 1930s, the Jewish population of Krakow was approximately 60,000, so roughly a quarter of the city's population. The city was an important center of Jewish life in Poland, and between the wars, there was increasing engagement of the Jewish population with Polish civic life, right? So it was part of founding this new nation of Poland. While Kazimierz, as I mentioned, was the center of the Jewish community, Jewish residents lived throughout the city of Krakow, which was a legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which in many ways had protected and granted full rights to Jewish citizens in the area. While the Jewish community of Krakow was robust and influential, it's also important to note that Krakow was a predominantly Catholic city, true, in fact, for the entire country of Poland. This is one of the few pictures I have of my grandmother's family. So you see my grandmother was Moses and Rachel's third child. Rachel died in 1928, which is why she's not, when my grandmother was just 8 years old, which is why she's not in this picture. So this photo has Moses. He's surrounded by his children. So that's Sidonia, who's on the left, who is my grandmother's oldest sister. And then also her older brother, Abraham, and then Salomea, or my grandmother, who I call Wanda. Names are going to get confusing throughout this speech. And then her younger sister, Anna. Moses and Rachel also had another child, Pesla, who died shortly after she was born, and Rachel died in childbirth. From my understanding, the Wanders were relatively well off, and Moses' business was flourishing. They owned the apartment building in the old town in which they lived, and all of the children received full education. I know relatively little about the family's religious life. It was something my grandmother never discussed, but I believe that they were observant, yet secular enough to dress as you see in the picture, and that Abraham went to college, to school in Cambridge to study chemical engineering. Wanda almost never spoke of her childhood, but in the few precious pre-war photos I have of her, I see a beautiful young woman. So this is my grandmother at the age of 19. I think this picture was taken around 1939, and that's the year that would find her moving from Krakow to Warsaw. Warsaw is a much larger city, northern Poland, and Warsaw had the largest Jewish population in the country, which numbered close to 350,000, almost 30% of the city's population. It was the largest center of Jewish life in Europe, second only, I think, in the world to New York City at the time. To show you what Warsaw looked like before and after the war, this is also pictures of the Old Town Square, which I think I keep returning to because after the war, my dad lived near what would have been the old town of Warsaw, which had been, as you see, so this is pre-war, post-war, reduced to rubble. He lived on a street called Szeroki Dunaj, and he and his friend Michał would actually play in the tunnels under the city. That was their playground as children growing up. So into this bustling metropolis, Salomea arrived and was married to a medical doctor whose last name was Rosenberg. She never spoke of him to me or my father, and indeed, the details of their life remain a mystery. In fact, I only know his name because my father saw it when he was a teenager, listed on my grandmother's application for U.S. citizenship. He never asked her about the application. He felt he wasn't supposed to, that what he had seen there was something that she didn't want to talk about. And so it remains another lost puzzle of her life. I've actually filed a Freedom of Information request to see her application in hopes of kind of recreating that memory for my father, but it is caught up in bureaucratic red tape. Theme of researching history. So 1939 Poland, to set the scene for you, found the nation on the brink of war. As the Nazi Party consolidated power in Germany, Adolf Hitler set his sights on reclaiming German land that was now a part of Poland. Having established pacts with Russia and Italy and subsuming Austria into Germany the year prior, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and Warsaw was besieged and captured by the end of that month. I know virtually nothing about Salomea, my grandmother, Wanda, married life in Warsaw. I don't know if she was happy. I don't know how she and Dr. Rosenberg met. Did she miss her family in Krakow? What I do know is that following the fall of Warsaw, at some point in time in the interim, Dr. Rosenberg was killed. And I believe that Salomea was taken in by a Polish family who sheltered her. As a kid, I remember her telling me a story somewhere, a history project I had to do for school to ask my grandparents about their history. And I remember her telling me a story about living with a family of farmers, and I knew it wasn't her family, and digging for potatoes. This was outside of the city, and that she talked about lying flat in the fields as warplanes and bombers flew overhead. I also remember her telling me a story very particular about standing outside the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto. So the Warsaw Ghetto was built in October 1940. After the Nazi invasion of Poland, Jewish residents were forced to register and wear armbands. A Jewish council was formed, and through the council, all of the residents were forced to eventually move into the ghetto. So this tiny portion, you can see, it's the portion highlighted in yellow, suddenly had 350 residents. And then with new arrivals of Jewish citizens from the surrounding countryside, that swelled the population of this tiny space of land to over 450,000 people. The ghetto was sealed off from the rest of the city by walls, and at least 80,000 people died of starvation or disease inside those walls before the population was deported to the Treblinka concentration camp. In present-day Warsaw, you can see this is a picture I actually took recently. There's a line of bricks that lives in the city that commemorates the outline of the ghetto walls. My grandmother never said why she was there, standing outside those walls, but she must have known people inside, and she never managed to share how she herself managed to remain outside. It's only recently that I found one possible record that might document her experience. And I will add, this is where the names get extra complicated, so bear with me and I'll take questions at the end. I've always known my grandmother, her name to be Wanda, right? But her birth name was Salomea, and I don't know for certain when she changed it. But the record I'm about to share is the earliest I have seen her name potentially listed as Wanda. So it's actually a listing from the Polish Center for Holocaust Research. I'm going to loosely translate this, and I had my cousin in Poland help me, so I think it's pretty accurate. But it shares that a woman named Wanda Rosenberg-Lew, could remember the name Lev because that will come back shortly, submitted a testimony on behalf of a woman named Salomea Ostryczka, stating that Salomea, hid Wanda for 5 months during the war after her husband, Abraham Rosenberg, was arrested by the Gestapo in 1943. I'm now in the process of applying to read both of their testimonies. There's a legal process to do that. I'm not 100% certain that this was my grandmother, but the timeline pieces fit in a way that no other documentation I've been able to find do. And I think that's also a part of the process of piecing together history. There's this degree of uncertainty, and the information can seem so close and yet so far out of reach. Outside of this one lead and the few memories I or my father have of conversations with my grandmother, that's all I know about her experiences during the war. I know that she was able to remain alive, most likely by hiding her identity and pretending to be Catholic. After her death, all Jan, my grandfather, would say about her experiences during the war were that it was very hard for her. By some means, she did manage to survive, as did her brother Abraham, who remained in school at Cambridge, completing his degree in chemical engineering. Her other family members did not. This is the last record I have of her father, Moses, and her younger sister, Anna. It's a questionnaire for Jewish residents of Krakow. It was completed by Moses in 1941. I was able to access it through the Holocaust Survivors and Victims database through records kept by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The first time I opened these documents, right, you get it in an email. It came into my Gmail account, and I remember opening them and just kind of stopping. It was deeply emotional for me, seeing my great-grandfather's handwriting, answering these relatively mundane questions. It asks him about the number of rooms in his house, if he was in good health. It just felt like a connection to a lost world. The paper was first issued in December 1940 and includes a date stamp for Aussiedlungsanweisung, which translates to resettlement instructions. And the date that is stamped is February 27th, 1941. So far, this is the last record I have of he and Anna. At this time, the Nazis were in the process of moving Jewish residents of Krakow into the ghetto, and I have not been able to find further details of Anna and Moses' lives. One piece of Moses that did remain beyond the war was his life insurance policy. It was held by an Italian company that did not honor their policies following the war. His claim was part of a long-running series of lawsuits that was eventually settled in 1998, shortly after my grandmother died. My grandmother's older sister, Sidonia, was married to a man named Chaim Niger. They were living in Tarnow at the start of the war. Tarnow, just for geographic context, is about an hour west of Krakow. And Sidonia was murdered by the Nazis. Chaim survived the war and moved to Israel. He provided this testimonial of her death, which is included in the records of Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, which you can search the archives for information on your family. While I do not know fully where my grandmother was at the end of the war, I do know that following the Soviet liberation of Poland in 1945, Wanda returned to Krakow in search of her family. And according to my father in Krakow, she was actually able to live back in the house where her father owned, which had been maintained by a Polish man who had worked with the family basically as a super before the war. And there, she met a man named Nachum Lev. The Lev comes back. So Nachum was also Jewish, older than her. He was born in 1907. And like my grandmother, had been married before the war. And his wife and young daughter were murdered. He was an engineer and had managed to escape to Russia during the war and returned to Poland afterwards to look for his family. So Wanda and Nachum were married shortly after they met. And in May 1947, this is the picture you see, she gave birth to my father in a Poland that was still in ruins from World War II. In a strange twist of fate, I will share that fact is far stranger than fiction. Nachum was killed in a boating accident 3 months after my father's birth. I think that loss, on top of everything else she had already experienced, at only the age of 27, was really, I would say, just traumatic for my grandmother. She never spoke of Nachum, and in fact, didn't tell my dad who he was. She never said his name or never told my dad that he was his biological father. I think that's another point of the legacy of war. It's, sorry, excuse me. The damage of trauma, right? So my grandmother had lost her entire world, and she'd come back with hope. She had built a family, and it was ripped away from her once again. While I did not even know of Nachum's existence until I was 18, thanks so much, through research, I was able to find a memoir by a woman named Hinda Bergner, who was actually a cousin of Nachum's. This is a picture of Hinda. She wrote a slim volume. It's called On Long Winter Nights, and it shares the details of her life growing up in a Jewish community right outside of Krakow. So it's a Galician township. So that's the region that surrounds Krakow. And toward the end of her memoirs, there's actually a passage that's about Nachum and his first wife, Frania. It was so wonderful to read it. It just really brought to life this world that I'd never imagined. It gave me some understanding of the grandfather that I didn't know. So I want to read the passage for you. It's actually a kind of funny story. So Okay, I'm going to try, and I'm going to hopefully pronounce everyone's names correctly. So this is from Hinda. So Rivsha, who was Nachum's mother, his third son, Nachum, is an engineer. He fell in love with a girl from Warsaw when he was quite young. And of course, neither had any money, but they married anyhow. The story of Nachum Lev goes like this. Melek Lev, that's Nachum's older brother, had already been in Warsaw a long time, and he certainly knew a lot of girls. Once, when he came home to 90 Mickiewicz Street in Przemysl, one of the girls followed him and stayed with Etzel Gut, a neighbor, who lived across the street from the Levs. But the girl's more attractive sister also came to visit and stayed with Etzel. Now, Nachum, who was a handsome, tall, young bachelor, had only just finished his first year of technical studies, but he quickly fell in love with this girl. That's Hinda, was in Przemysl at the time when the Warsaw girls were living with Etzel. Rivsha complained to me that the money she had sent to support Nachum in his studies and also some extra for vacation was wasted by Nachum on the girls. Soon after that, Itzigut's son, Babish, dropped by to inform us that Nachum had taken the prettier girl, or she had taken him, and together they had run away to Warsaw to get married. Nachum wanted Rivsha to go with him to attend the ceremony, but she refused because she did not approve of the marriage. But as soon as he was gone, she regretted her decision. She picked up and went after them. She thought she could stop him at least until he finished his studies, but she didn't stand a chance. He had already put on a suit and top hat and was standing under the wedding canopy. Dorcha had to send him money to finish his studies. Rivsha has only one grandchild, Nachum's little daughter. It's such a charming, drama-filled story. I feel like it could be a pitch for a Netflix pilot. Until you realize that Rivsha's only granddaughter, whose name was Sylvia Anna, along with Hinda Bergner and Nachum's first wife, Frania, were murdered. Their names appear on Nachum's grave, along with those of his other family members who were killed in the Holocaust. Nachum's brother, Melek, who after the war, continuing the trend of confusing names, went by Pavel Marek, also survived. And it's actually through his son, Michał, who you may remember from that first picture, my dad's best friend growing up, that I have a picture of Nachum's daughter, Sylvia Anna. I don't know her story either, but she would have been my father's half-sister. So, who was the grandfather that I knew? This is another part of my family's history. And there again, some great quality photos. That's somewhere around the early 90s. So also on the boat with Nachum that day in 1947 was a colleague of his, a man named Jan Drobot. Jan was a strong swimmer and managed to survive the accident. And he was actually the person who informed my grandmother of Nachum's death. He too was Jewish. His name was originally Jakub Djament. And he went on to become the man I knew as my grandfather. The story of his family is somewhat more documented than Wanda's. He and his twin brother, so that's the two of them down there, Stefan, were born in 1913, also in Krakow. His father, who you see on that side, Yitzhak, was a timber surveyor, and his mother, Hava Eva, was a homemaker, and they had three brothers. Jan's father had served in the Austrian army, and his lungs were compromised during that service, so he died when Jakub was only 19, and the five brothers took great pride in taking care of their mother. Both of the twins excelled in math and science, and Jakub, that's him as a young man, studied engineering at the German Polytechnic in Brno, and subsequently went on to study for his the equivalent of his master's degree at the University of Lvov, which you may recognize as present-day Lviv, which is now currently in what we would call the Ukraine. And in fact, actually, Jakub was forced to flee university before completing his master's due to an anti-Jewish action, and went to work in a paper mill in the late 1930s. At the beginning of the war, he and his brother met and fled the German invasion by escaping to Russia. Speaking with my father, he believes that Stefan and Jan were, call it, recruited by the Russian authorities, but thanks to their engineering experience, were subsequently conscripted to Siberia, where Jakub became Jan Drobot, Jan being more commonly Polish adaptation. And Drobot was actually the name of his Ukrainian roommate from university. And he worked as an electrical engineer for most of the war, building power lines in Siberia. I also believe that's actually where Jan met Jakub. The brothers returned to Poland after the war, assuming that they were the only survivors. But actually their brother, Israel, who was now named Stanislaw Julius Rutkowski, or Ulik for short, also survived. Jan joined the Communist Party and worked with Nachum Lev. After Nachum's death, Jan married Wanda and adopted my father. He and Wanda actually had my dad's birth certificate changed so that it listed Jan as the father and stated his place of birth as Zakopane. It's a mountain resort town. And so that is how I came to know him as my grandfather. And actually much of the entire Djament brothers' history is recorded in Ulik's memoir, Another Life, a memoir of the Shoah. I mentioned earlier, right? These are the grandparents that I know. So these are pulled from some family photos. And had shared that my grandparents, my father and his younger sister, Eve, yes, they were named Adam and Eve. I think that should have been a clue. It made a lot more sense when kind of found out all of this. First left Poland by moving to India. Having shared their history, I think it just puts a lot more context of living in Poland after the war, just in a different light. Jan and Wanda were both Polish citizens, and I remember them being proud of that fact. But I also think it wasn't safe for them in Poland after the war, given their Jewish identity and some of the very complex history and what was going on in the country at the time. So Jan, through his work, was able to receive a diplomatic posting from the Polish Ministry of Trade to India, and it offered them an opportunity to leave the past behind. Following their posting to India, what actually happened is that my grandfather defected to the United States. So this is the height of the Cold War, right? And it was no easy feat. Through a contact he had made while living in India, the family would actually spend up to 5 months kind of moving all around Europe before officially being brought to the United States. And I had asked my dad about this some time ago, of how he came to the country, what that was like. They landed at Andrews Air Force Base in 1960. So that's how they came into the country. Jan was 47 at the time, basically starting a career from scratch. The family moved because he had some connections to England, which is where my father went to boarding school for a short time. And then my grandfather was able to secure a job at the Westinghouse Corporation. And then ultimately they returned to the United States and settled in White Plains, New York, which is where my father finished high school. So these pictures, I think, really capture the grandparents I knew, Van and Yanda, or as I called them, Nana and Yai. Wanda was so gregarious. She was the life of the party, of any room she walked into, and a consummate hostess. There was also a deep sadness to her. She would fall into spells of depression and be unable to leave her bedroom for weeks at a time. She was this contradictory figure, someone I just greatly admired, but never really understood. And though it's taken me years to piece together their complex shared history, I feel a duty to learn more, to try and understand her and Jan and Nachum's stories, and to share them. I will also add that there are some bright spots. Mentioned Nachum's brother, Pavel, who survived the war, and in fact, Michał, my dad's childhood friend, was actually my dad's cousin. So they've reconnected, and I've been able several times to go back to Poland, and this is from our most recent trip. Michał's daughter, Kasia, is basically my age, and this is her daughter, Zosia, and her husband and family. My dad and Michał FaceTime often, so it's possible to rebuild some of these lost connections. I'll share one final thought in closing. I'm already 2 generations removed from what my grandparents experienced. And as you can see from what I shared, so much of their history, the true shape and horror of it, has been lost. It was something that was so powerful that my grandparents, and my grandmother in particular, chose to hide their identity, saying that they felt safer living outwardly as outwardly Catholic in this world. My grandmother I remember very prominently in her bedroom, even though she only went to church for midnight mass on Christmas Eve, had a crucifix on her wall. It's one of those memories that you remember. And I think I can only guess at their motives. But I believe that they were ultimately rooted in fear. I think that's the reason that I'm here today sharing this really deeply personal story. Because I don't want to forget what they experienced. I don't want to forget their names or the names of their relatives who were murdered. And I was so lucky to get to know my grandparents, but my father didn't have that opportunity because of the Holocaust. I share this in hopes that the fear that they felt can be defeated. That we can realize that the true victims of any war are innocent men, women, and children. And that the legacy of that violence and hatred is a trauma and fear that lives emotionally in generations. And so I'm dedicated to building a world where people, with, no matter their race, their gender, their religion, so many of the myriad ways we identify, can exist and live freely and openly in peace. Sorry, I apologize for being emotional. Just thank you so much for letting me share this story with you. I really deeply appreciate it. And happy to take questions. It's funny. I will say, as I try and stop crying, when I did this on Zoom with Noah and Christina, I was like, I kind of got choked up there. I don't know what it's going to be like when I do it in front of more people. And so apparently that's what it's like. But yeah, let's see a hand here.
Claire, Claire, I go to all the city theater shows, and I'm curious how this experience will inform your choices of future shows. Obviously, Montez has wherever he went.
Montez is in a reading. I'll look for it on Thursday night. He's doing a reading at Arcade Comedy of Golden Girls pilot. So,
so when the two of you go to choose the future seasons, will this experience make you lean towards anything of a Jewish content?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and we've produced many plays by Jewish playwrights, and I think, while I don't want to speak for the two of us because we could have a whole other long conversation about what season planning is like. I mean, I think the core of the work we do is human stories, and certainly it's part of how I identify as an artist. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes. Here.
Thank you for a very heartfelt, informative, and just lovely presentation. Do any of the relatives, or have any of the relatives that you've met or found out about, maintain their Jewish identities?
I believe that some of Jan's family, who ultimately ended up living in Australia, maintained some of their Jewish identities. But Michał did not. But I would say his father, Pavel, was not especially religious. He was an activist and an anarchist, actually, and so not for the most part that I know of.
Okay.
No. Oh. Thank you for speaking. Excuse me. I have a couple questions. Do you have any relatives that live with us in America?
Not in America. My dad's sister lives in Toronto. But
And what does she practice?
she's not religious. Yeah.
Now, the thing you mentioned, maybe I missed it. Last group of pictures from your family in Poland, and you said you lived with your father
Yes, with my father's cousin. So he and me house Zoom fairly frequently.
Where's your father now?
My dad. My dad is, yes. My parents live outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah, they still live.
Yeah. They still they've lived in the States my whole life.
And are they practicing?
No.
They're not. Last question.
No, it's okay.
You showed a tombstone
Yes.
with all the names. Who put that up?
I don't actually know if it was my grandmother or if it was Nachum's family. But it was I don't actually know. But no, that tombstone is in the Jewish cemetery in Krakow. Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Come in. Did this?
Hi, thank you for sharing your story. I know everybody here really appreciates it. I was wondering, what was your father's reaction when you found all of this out? Like, what was his?
Sure. So he would. As we've been able to kind of talk further about this, right? When my grandmother passed, he was, I think, 51, and so he had inklings of this around his citizenship, applying for American citizenship. So when he would have been actually around the same age I was when my grandmother died, and so I think he knew some of it. But I think in some ways it was probably a little overwhelming when it all came out. I mean, I think, right, it's a rite of passage to lose our parents. It's at some point in time. It's a sad rite, but it happens. And so I think he was also dealing with that grief and then finding all of this out. So I think it was a lot, but he's also a very just like logically minded person. And so I think it took us a long time to be able to talk about it, and I don't want to talk about his process too much, but I think it was a different reaction, maybe than mine, but also something that was massive to really start to talk about openly.
I also have a question about your research really quick.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
The slide that you showed with the information from Poland,
Yes.
Can anybody apply to get that? My grandmother was actually from the Warsaw area, and she had to flee Poland when the Nazis came.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if, could I find out her information?
Yeah. Yes, I believe so. And actually, I can't remember if it was Emily or Christina. You'd connected me with some researchers in Poland, and then I'm fortunate to have cousins over there. So Kasha's helping me with some of the applications. But you can apply for that. There are points in time when you have to prove your relationship, and I don't want to talk too deeply about it because I'm not an expert in it. But if you have documentation, I will say the other thing. And this is something both the staff, some of the researchers at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and then again in Poland in the archives, because Warsaw was so utterly destroyed during the war, a lot of those records, which is why I think I haven't been able to find my grandmother's marriage license to her first husband, were destroyed. So there are things missing, but yeah. And probably more experts in the room who may be able to better answer the question.
No, my question gets to the I'm sorry, Roseanne, we'll come over to you. We were just passing it right here. You said your FOIA request is delayed, held up, whatever. Do you have any reason to think it's anything other than time and process and backlog?
I think it's time and process.
Do you want help moving that time and process and backlog?
Sure, because I'm also, I think there are times when you're like...
There are people in this room that know people, and you just move something in a pile. I think it's fascinating because... It's good to find out this information, to have it for a family while survivors are still around and alive, etc. So we can talk.
Thanks. Thank you.
I was going to say, I'm going to come over around to, you had the next question, right? There is an organization called YIVO, which I just visited in New York City, that does a lot of research on Eastern European Jews, and also Jewish Gen, which is based out of the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York, and I was just there last week. So if anyone wants information, just contact me at the Holocaust Center. And Nancy's nodding her head, and she knows Yiddish, so she might be a good resource too.
Thank you for the outstanding talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how exactly you found out that your grandparents were Jewish, and a little bit more details about your reaction to that when you learned about it.
Sure. Yes, I can. And I will. I will say it made for just very complicated familial relationships, and I think some of it after this passed, as my father and his sister and Jan were kind of navigating Nana's estate and some of these things. I think once she had passed, Jan felt more comfortable talking about it, and Eve, in a similar way to my understanding, had an understanding of seeing some of the documentation about my father's Nachum and some of that. So again, it was this kind of family secret that nobody talked about, and it all started to come out. And I mean, I think for me, it really was like I didn't know what it meant. It just felt like you had this history, you had this understanding of your family, and suddenly, right? I think at 18, you're just thinking a lot about your own identity, like, who am I in the world? I'm about to, go to college, and especially, I was an artist, right? Even at that time, and so it felt really important to understand identity. And bless you. And I didn't know what to do with it. It felt important, but I had also I think at the time, right, especially it was, I didn't have a relationship to the Jewish community, to Judaism. I had Jewish friends, but I wasn't religious. And I think it was just kind of overwhelming, and then it was this kind of touchstone that you'd come back to every couple of years and be like, well, I want to know more, what actually happened. And I couldn't tell you why that was important to me. But I think now I'm beginning to understand it's just about how we live in the world and how I think the past influences the present. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm not sure that I have a good answer to that. But yeah.
Did you?
Okay. I'm going to make my way to the back.
Just wondering what happened to your grandmother's brother who was in England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's another thing of from my understanding, I think possibly because he had lived in England during the war. And again, I don't know her entire history, but she had not for all of it. I think there was some strife over that. He ultimately emigrated to Canada as well, and they did stay in touch, but they weren't close. And I know that my dad remembers at one point in time, fairly early on after they were brought to the States, because it was also the height of the Cold War, right? So some of the international tensions around this, I think, were fairly high. But he talks about remembering being driven up to meet at a motel by Niagara Falls so that Nana could meet with her brother. And so again, not very close. And I think that's also just a part of that story and that legacy, that it caused friction and division, within the family. Yeah.
First, thank you very much for sharing. And I had two things that I wanted to mention. One is I have a very good friend whose grandparents are from Europe,
mm-hmm.
and they would be probably if they were still alive, 80 or older. I don't remember, but all four of them, when they came to the U.S., they became Christians, different sects,
but
all. and that just really kind of surprised me to hear that. And then the other is, I was wondering if you had read We Were the Lucky Ones and what you thought about it.
I don't think I've read We Are the Lucky Ones, but I will share. I just finished up. A friend had recommended it, the postcard, and that book like really resonated. Even though but I haven't. I've read a couple of other, and I will say the other thing is, as I started to find out and do more research, this story, my grandparents' story and my story, isn't actually that uncommon. I think it was something that happened to a number of people, and even I will say outside of stories that are maybe specific to the experience of the Holocaust. I think it's something that I've been surprised as I've researched a story and shared it with friends and colleagues, is that it resonates in other ways of hidden family history. That's why I asked that question at the beginning, that this idea of what is safety, what is identity, and how do we change it and morph in front of other people, I think is actually in many ways a somewhat universal experience, and there's just something to that. Yeah. The postcard. Yeah. And I can look it up for you afterwards who the author is. I'm going to blank right now, but yeah, the postcard.
May go to Ted and continue, Steve. Thank you very much. I have known, do know other second generation. Some of them were never let in on the noise of the knock. Their parents would never tell them about exactly how that knock sounded. That fear grew. And some of them were told everything.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, where do you think you live now? I mean, what weight do you carry? Is it a burden, or it's just a mandate for you? Is it something that you just have to see through and understand? I don't know any of them who can get through what you just has gone through without crying.
Yeah.
It's just because it's the weight that you pull, but I'm wondering where this leaves you. I mean,
that's interesting. I mean, I think I do feel a sense of duty to share that story, and then also a little bit of a sense of guilt because it was something that they never talked about. And so I think that's something that trying to it feels like because it was a secret, there's some shame associated with it, and there shouldn't be. And so I think, I don't know, it's a combination. And I think being someone who knew almost nothing about it and then is just trying to piece together these details after the people who experienced it have passed, does feel a little bit like a mandate to share that because it feels somehow important. I don't know. I think I really believe in that concept of what it means to be able to keep someone's name alive.
I'm interested in this sort of interplay of identity and religion, and having an identity without being religious.
Mm-hmm.
And just a very pointed question: do you now identify as Jewish?
Oh,
question mark.
It's a complex. I think it's a complex answer. I mean, I think the way I feel most comfortable phrasing it, because I'm not part of a religious community, is that I have Jewish heritage and Jewish ancestry. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I deeply identify with. But and I wouldn't want to feel comfortable in front of folks. You can identify in so many ways. Not being a part of a deeper religious community, I wouldn't want to wear that in a way where someone would feel uncomfortable with it. Or does that answer your question? So I think it's complicated. Yeah. But certainly I think, to me the best way I can phrase it is that I'm of Jewish heritage and ancestry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I was a little bit curious about when you said lapsed Catholic.
Yes.
That implies being lapsed from something. For instance, were you baptized?
No, so I was not baptized, but both of both of my parents were. So both my dad and my mom. My mom's from like a German and Irish Catholic family. But I believe my dad was baptized, and I know he went to like the schools that he went to had some religious affiliation like up until high school, and he went to high school in White Plains, which is like public school in America. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Do we have any other questions? Oh. Okay.
Can you remember anything that your grandparents did that was Jewish? Now in retrospect, thinking back.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are a couple of like, my grandmother had like, I think of some few things that were her family's from before the war. And they were, I think, Seder dishes. And I think there are other things that in talking closely with, friends who were raised in Jewish households that felt like they identified. Also, someone had asked me this earlier, and I realized my grandparents did have some friends who were both in the States and then around the world. And I believe that some of their friends, like who were Polish, but were also Jewish. And so when all of this came out, it just started to connect some of the dots of that, but again, I think for a little bit I at least was sort of maybe kept at arm's length from them, that was that identity. And, it was the same with my dad and them not wanting my dad to speak Polish. I think it was a way to protect some of that information. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago that your mother was baptized.
Mm-hmm.
Was she born Jewish, of Jewish heritage, or?
No. My mom was born in Syracuse, New York, to the Irish Catholic and German parents. So she was not of Jewish faith. Yeah. I don't know if it's against etiquette to get two questions, but I heard from someone who works there that the Hillel in Warsaw is having all kinds of people just like you presenting to them. Really? Yes. And I just wondered if you had talked to any of them ever. No, I haven't. Yeah.
The Warsaw we're just, yeah.
So, connect you. Very cool. I will add that because I feel like it's interesting telling a story like halfway through, that I feel like come back to me in a couple of years and maybe I'll know more.
Oh, Toby.
Thank you. Along that theme in Krakow also, there's a very active JCC Jewish community, not all Jewish.
Yeah.
But they have meals and so on. And that might be something you might be interested in because it is in Krakow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been back to both of them. So my cousins live in Warsaw, but Kasia grew up in Krakow, so I've been to visit them. But yeah, we've never. It's interesting. I think we've never done some of those deeper research things. Maybe yeah.
There are quite a number of elderly Jewish people and Polish people that go to this JCC.
Oh, really?
That may even have some memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a possibility for you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? This is impressive. You got a lot of questions.
I hope it gave you satisfied answers.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you all.
And now that everyone actually knows how to find this room, it'll be easier for our next event, which is going to be, and you can park along that road just so now that you've navigated. But next month on the same day, the 18th of July, we're going to be hosting another one of our generation's community members, Dr. Melissa Marks, who is going to be sharing again, her stories of her mother and grandfather's survival story for the first time publicly here. And I've seen her presentation. It's incredible, and it's a really wonderful story. And then on August 5th, we're going to be doing a public program with the Bamileke, who are descendants of a Cameroonian genocide, and talk about our shared relationship and work that we've been doing. And for those here, there's several people here that are part of the Generations community. We're kind of a tight-knit group. Even though we all have different stories and different family experiences, we in some ways feel like extended family. So I want to thank you guys for coming. If you want to stop by the back table on your way out, we have some books that feature some local survivors, and we're happy to answer any questions. So thank you.